Welcome to the Afterlight Podcast with me, Lauren Grace, a spiritual podcast full of stories and conversations that prove we're never alone. The Afterlight Podcast aims to inspire and educate. Remember, you are the authority on your own life. I encourage you to run everything through your own filter, to take what resonates, and I also urge you to do your own research and consult with qualified professionals for advice on your personal situation. The opinions shared by guests are their own, and any advice by our guests or by me is not a substitute for professional guidance. Thank you so much for listening, and I enjoy journeying back with you to the afterlight. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Lauren Grace here. Welcome to the episode today, and I'm flying solo today. I have to just let you know that at the moment I am traveling around Australia in a bus with my husband and my dog, and when you are doing that, sometimes you are recording in different locations. So today I am recording in a caravan park. And there are some new neighbors of mine who are currently leveling their caravan. So if you hear anything in the background, it might be because that is what is going on in the background. But sometimes when we assign ourselves time to record a podcast, we just have to persevere through. So just hopefully it'll just lend itself to the vibe of today's show. Now, on today's show, I wanted to talk about a couple of different things. I wanted to talk about a really interesting story that I heard a few different times now, and it helps me to keep things in perspective in life. I want to share with you some of the ways that our subconscious can at times be communicating with us and what those signs could possibly look like. And I also wanted to talk a bit about assumptions, adding tones, and some different ways that we can look at embracing the thoughts in our mind. So that's what is going to be going on today's show. So thank you for joining me. So let's get to it. First of all, the subconscious. So this is a really interesting topic. I will say I'm not a subconscious expert. I'm not an expert in the subconscious, but I am going to be talking about some examples in which I think my subconscious has been communicating to me, and sometimes it communicates to me through footwear. And so I remember a little while ago, I was having some issues with my shoes. And so, for example, I had a broken shoe, I put a shoe on the wrong foot, and then most recently I stepped in gum 2 different times with 2 different shoes. It's so funny, actually. I had a pair of black sandals, and I wore them down to the beach. And when I got back, I realized I'd stepped in gum. And I was like, damn it, I've stepped in gum. So I put them aside, and I brought out another pair of the exact same shoe, brand new, and I started wearing them while I was, sorting out the other shoe that had been stuck in gum. And so a day or 2 later, I looked down and I realized that I'm wearing my old shoes with gum stuck in one of the sandals. And then I looked and realized that actually I had somehow stepped with the same foot, wearing essentially the same shoe 2 different times. So I actually had 2 left feet, which is right side, feminine, intuition, reflection, side. Both had been covered in gum. So just super weird. And a way of, I believe, my subconscious kind of asking me to pay a little bit of attention on what I've got going on. So one of the things that I think is really cool is that the universe speaks to us in signs and symbols, and that sometimes we can look at, different signs that we might have, like numbers, and sometimes there's universally agreed upon definitions and meanings for things. But sometimes we can also have our own meaning for things. So for example, when I get knee pain, I know that that's an indication, or if I'm working with somebody who has knee pain, an indication of maybe a fear of moving forward. I believe that's a pretty universal idea of that. Now, when we're working with like feet and things like that, it's the same sort of concept, moving forward, advancement, right? But one of the things that our subconscious can often do is communicate to us in a language that we understand. So, for example, when I see signs like hearts in nature, or I see, different words out there, different number combinations, I know that the universe is communicating to me in a way that I've assigned it. So when I do mediumship, for example, I might get a sign that I know for me means something, but might mean something different for somebody else. So for example, if I'm talking to a spirit, and they focus on the hands for me, especially if I'm reading for like spirit, a male in spirit, and the hands come through, that to me shows that there was like manual labor in that person's job, that they were like really physical. So maybe car stuff, construction, that kind of thing. If the hands are more delicate, I know that they were doing more practical type work, maybe more maybe more literary stuff, like reading, or even doing administration, or like businessy kind of stuff versus like the physical. So that's just an example. So I was just thought I would talk a bit about like the gum situation. And I just wanted to know if maybe that was something that had ever happened to you. Has your subconscious shown up in shoes or in footwear or stepping in gum? I mean, stepping in gum is, for me, pretty obviously like, are you stuck somewhere? Are you not advancing? Is there something going on? Like maybe you haven't been, moving forward and like putting things into practice. And when I was reflecting on that, I thought, well, ever since I got on the road, I haven't figured out the balance of meditation and yoga. And I do, yoga and meditation kind of when it suits me, but I'm not always making the best effort in that way. And that's a lot of where I get a lot of my answers from, and a lot of my reflection and my ability to go within and connect to my own energy and stuff like that is when I take the time out to do those practices. So, is my subconscious saying to me, girl, maybe look at curating and creating a bit more space for that? I would say yes, that's definitely an indication of that. So I don't really have like a huge message here for you, except to say that, is there something going on in your life that maybe you're getting these patterns, or maybe you're getting these little indications of things not working very well? For example, I talked to someone a little while ago who had a car accident, and it's like, well, it was a small fender bender. Nobody was injured, but maybe it's the universe's way of saying, hey, like maybe slow down a little bit, pay attention, enjoy where you are instead of rushing and hurrying to the next destination. So yeah, that's just kind of what I wanted to jam on today in regards to that. I haven't had any shoe issues in a while, except for sometimes my shoelaces do come undone, actually, like the other day they did. So maybe that's a way of going, okay, so next time my shoelace comes undone, instead of frantically trying to do it up because I'm on a walk and I'm making an effort to walk at a certain pace and blah, 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 maybe take an inventory and notice what is around me. Is there something that I need to pay attention to? Is there like $1 on the ground, or is there a beautiful bird or a flower for me to smell? Or is it just an indication and a reminder to be in the moment now instead of thinking about where I'm headed? Yes, so that's what I wanted to jam on with that. Okay, the next topic is about making assumptions, and also the story of the Chinese farmer. This story originally came from Alan Watts, but I also heard Eckhart Tolle talk about it. But it was the example of a story where things happen and it could be perceived as being negative and it could be perceived as being positive. But when you don't know, you just allow things to be. So, for example, there is, it's something along the lines of, there's a Chinese farmer and he's, farming, and he has a son that works with him. And one day his son, and him are in the paddock, and a horse escapes. Okay. And everyone goes, oh no, your horse escaped. That must be so awful. That's so bad. And then he says, maybe it is, and maybe it's not. Right. And then a couple of days later, the horse returns and he brings with him all of these wild horses. And everyone's like, wow, look at all these wild horses that your horse brought back with you. That is so great. And he's like, maybe it is, maybe it's not. Essentially saying that, I care not what happens. Like the outcome is not, I'm not going to add a good or a bad onto this scenario. I'm just going to accept it for what it is. So a couple of days later, his son is training the horses and he falls off and he breaks his leg. And the community is like, "Oh no, your son broke his leg. That's the worst thing. It's so bad. Now no one's there to help you." And he's going, "Well, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, maybe, who knows, right?" And then the army comes to town and they are taking all eligible men, and his son has a broken leg, so he is not asked to enroll for the army. And so the army goes off without him and he stays at home, and everyone goes, "Wow, how lucky are you that your son got to stay here and not go with the army?" Well, maybe it's good and maybe it's bad, right? So I find that story is really helpful when we're especially thinking about situations in our life and then looking and going, is this good or is this bad? And I think I've talked about it on the show a bit, but there's this Ram Dass talk, and he's saying, like, we don't know enough to worry. And then I was recalling today when I was out for a walk with George, I was thinking, there was this, I can't remember who said it, but maybe it was even Ram Dass, but it was around the idea that if you knew who walked beside you would not fear. And I think when we label things as good and bad, or bad or negative or positive, or, that's going to be really great or that's not, we kind of taint the outcome sometimes, or we sort of don't allow things to just be as they are. When we add those old stories, or we add those fears or those worries or even those hopes and stuff on stuff, then we kind of, I find we create challenges for ourselves at times by labeling things instead of just accepting the situation as it is. And I feel that very often, we also make assumptions about things, what other people think, or what text messages mean. I remember I had this really big aha moment years ago when I was reading a text message out, and my husband's like, "You're adding the tone." And I went, "Oh, whoa." And I thought about that. I'm like, I am adding a tone. What if I sung this text message? It would be completely different, right? So you could read something that says, "Hi, how are you? I hope you're having a good day," right? With that tone. Or, "Hey, how are you? Hope you're having a good day," with that tone. And it has two very different meanings, two very different feelings. And so when I was thinking about the Chinese farmer story, going, yes, it could be bad, it could be good, who's to say? I feel that that's also for assumptions, is it good? Is it bad? I mean, who's to say? It is what it is. So I hope, I've kind of like expressed myself clearly, but I really wanted to bring that up because I find that it's a really hopeful story when I see myself adding it, maybe a negative story or fear-based thought on something, or worrying about the outcome, where I go, well, it just is what it is. And that is enough. It's neither good nor bad, right? And so that also led me to wanting to talk with you about the happiness trap. There's this book called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. And I started reading it. To be fair, I'm only 29% through, so I really need to keep reading it. But there were some really interesting lessons or interesting techniques that Russ is talking about in his book. And a big part of it is a lot about thoughts and emotions and stories and things like that we tell ourselves. And one of the things that I thought was really cool that I wanted to share with you was about a technique that he shared about negative thoughts and negative stories. And so I thought I would share this with you, called the silly voice technique. So again, this is taken from The Happiness Trap. And when I was reading it on my iPad, and this is from page 69. And it says, "This technique is particularly good with recurrent negative self-judgments. Find a thought that upsets or bothers you. Focus on the thought for 10 seconds, believing it as much as possible, and notice how it affects you. Then pick an animated cartoon character with a humorous voice, such as Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Shrek, or Homer Simpson. Now bring the troubling thought to mind, but hear it in the cartoon character's voice, as if that character were speaking your thoughts out loud. And now notice what happens. Now get the negative thought back in the original form, and again believe it as much as possible, and notice how it affects you. Next, pick a different cartoon character or a character from a movie or television show. Consider characters such as Darth Vader, Yoda, Gollum, or someone from your favorite sitcom, or actors with distinctive voices like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Eddie Murphy. And once again, bring the distressing thought to mind. Now, I love this idea because it's really making me kind of realize that that's the same with thoughts and assumptions that we're making, that we can also go ahead and we can change the way that we're hearing things too, or reading things. And I've had some people, send me emails before, and I will add that tone. Like, I will be sitting there reading this email and adding the tone. And that's me making an assumption that there's a negative thing here, or that person is upset, or I've made a mistake, or blah, blah, blah. And I just find that it's just like really draining and gets in the way of success and happiness, essentially. So Russ also goes on to say that after doing this exercise and then repeating it, you've probably found that you're not taking that negative thought quite so seriously. You may have even found yourself grinning or chuckling. Notice that you haven't tried to change the thought, get rid of it, argue with it, push it away, debate whether it's true or false, replace it with a more positive thought, or distract yourself from it in any way. You have merely seen it for what it is, a bit of language. By taking that segment of language and hearing it in a different voice, you become aware that it is nothing more than a string of words, and thus it loses its impact. And I just feel that all of those ideas, the Chinese farmer, the happiness trap, making assumptions, they all work really together, because they're essentially telling the story of chill out, don't add a negative or positive onto anything. Things just are what they are. Don't overcomplicate it. And I personally have found a lot of peace and a lot of clarity in my mind when I've been able to be aware of those things. And so I just really wanted to share that with you today, especially if you're someone who spirals and has negativity and at times challenges. I find that when we can keep some of that stuff in mind, it can really help. So that's what I wanted to chat about today. That's the episode. Short and sweet, baby. And if you loved it, please let me know. Leave me a review. If you did not like it, but you listened this far, respect. Thank you so much. Let me know what you'd like to hear me talk about instead. Or if there are any guests that you'd like to have on the show, or any different modalities or things that you'd like me to, talk to people about. I'm doing this show for you. And so I would love to hear how it's working for you. And I'm just sending you a lot of good vibes and a lot of love and a lot of light. Talk to you next time. Bye. Hi. Thanks so much for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave us a review where you listen to your podcast and share it with your friends. Thank you. New episodes every Thursday.